Lijep pozdrav dragi moji, drage moji, dobrodošli u još jednu follow-up lekciju na ovom kanalu. Kao što ste već imali priliku vidjeti, fokus današnje lekcije su WH questions u gramatičkom vremenu koji poznajemo kao past continuous. Sve što trebamo imati danas na umu jeste redoslijed riječi u rečenici i naravno da su sve ove aktivnosti stavljene u jednu određenu tačku u prošlosti kada je ta radnja trajala. Dakle, nije se desila, već je trajala. I hope you're ready. Let's get started. Idemo postaviti pitanje što sam ja radila. U ovom slučaju glagol raditi prevodimo sa glagolom do. Pa pitamo what was I doing? I can't remember. What was I doing? Ko je igrao karte? Who was playing cards? Who was playing cards? Alice was walking around the lake. Gdje je Alice hodala? Where was Alice walking? Where was Alice walking? Ko je hodao oko jezera? Who, tako je, was walking around the lake? Who was walking around the lake? Carol was listening to the radio. Idemo opet pitati što je Carol radila. What was Carol doing? What was Carol doing? A kako ćemo pitati ko je slušao radio? Who was listening to the radio? Who was listening to the radio? We were reading a book about New Zealand. Što smo mi čitali? Što ste vi čitali? What were you reading? What were you reading? Ko je čitao knjigu o Novom Zelandu? Opet ćemo umjesto were imati was jer pitamo za subjekat. Who was reading a book about New Zealand? Who was reading a book about New Zealand? Lisa was looking for her ring. Dakle, što je tražila Lisa? What was Lisa looking for? Ajmo opet imamo prepoziciju na kraju jer je to dio ovog glagola. Look for, tražiti. What was Lisa looking for? Jake and Julie were visiting a castle. Što su radili Jake and Julie? What were Jake and Julie doing? What were Jake and Julie doing? Kako ćemo pitati ko je posjećivao, ko je bio u posjeti zamku? Naravno, umjesto were imat ćemo was. Who was visiting a castle? Who was visiting a castle? Anne was writing an email. Ajmo pitati što je Anne pisala. What was Anne writing? What was Anne writing? Rob was buying flowers. Idemo pitati što je kupovao Rob. What was Rob buying? Tako je. What was Rob buying? Hazel was swimming in the pool. Gdje je plivala Hazel? Where was Hazel swimming? Where was Hazel swimming? Betty je radila svoju zadaću. Što je Betty radila? What was Betty doing? What was Betty doing? Robert was watching Star Trek. Što je gledao Robert? What was Robert watching? What was Robert watching? Anna je čekala Sarah. Koga je čekala Ana? Sad imamo pitanje koga, a ne ko. Dakle, pitamo za objekat, indirektni objekat, znači da će naš poredak riječi biti kao za pitanje, ne kao za izjavnu rečenicu, jer ne pitamo za subjekat. Pa ćemo, dakle, odmah iza who, pomoćni glagol. Who was subjekat, Anna waiting for. Who was Anna waiting for? Riječ je o objektu prepozicije. For, wait for someone. A kako ćemo sada pitati? Ko je čekao Sarah? Dakle, isti redoslijed riječi će biti kao u izjavnoj rečenici. Dakle, who was waiting for Sarah? Who was waiting for Sarah? Anne and Jane were sitting in the kitchen. Ko je sjedio u kuhinji? Who, naravno, was. Who was sitting in the kitchen? Who was sitting in the kitchen? Gdje su sjedile Anne i Jane? Where were Anne and Jane sitting? Where were Anne and Jane sitting? Laura was working in a restaurant last week. Idemo pitati ko je radio u restoranu prošle sedmice. Vidimo da je riječ o upotrebi past continuous za neku privremenu situaciju, privremenu radnju u prošlosti. Who was working in a restaurant last week? Who was working in a restaurant last week? Kada je Laura radila u restoranu? When was Laura working in a restaurant? When was Laura working in a restaurant? Gdje je Laura radila prošle sedmice? Where was Laura working last week? Where was Laura working last week? Bob was walking home because his car had a flat tire. Dakle, Bob je išao kući pješke jer mu je pukla guma na autu. Have a flat tire. Dakle, mi moramo postaviti pitanje da dobijemo odgovor because his car had a flat tire. I zato nam treba upitna riječ why. Zašto? Dakle, mi smo sada fokusirani na ove dvije rečenice da napravimo pitanje. Why, pomoćni glagol was, subjekat Bob, oblik glagola u continuousu, walking, glavni glagol i ostatak je home. Why was Bob walking home? Why was Bob walking home? Mia and her family were having dinner at 6 o'clock. Pitat ćemo ko je večerao u 6 sati. Who was, tako je, having dinner at 6 o'clock. Who was having dinner at 6 o'clock? Idemo još pitati u koliko sati su Mia i njena porodica večerali. What time were Mia and her family having dinner? What time were Mia and her family having dinner? U drugom dijelu naše lekcije, naravno, vježbate izgovor ovih rečenica. Dakle, vježbate svoju fluentnost, što je na kraju krajeva i cilj ovih lekcija. Dakle, ja ću pitanja pročitati na našem, a vi ćete ta pitanja prevesti na engleski. Ukoliko ste naravno početnici, rečenice možete čitati sa ekrana, a ukoliko ste nešto napredniji, onda možete pokušati te rečenice prevesti, a da ne gledate u ekran. I hope you're ready. Let's get started. Što sam ja radila? What was I doing? Ko je igrao karti? Who was playing cards? Gdje je Alice hodala? Where was Alice walking? Ko je hodao oko jezera? Ili šetao oko jezera? Who was walking around the lake? Što je radila Carol? What was Carol doing? Ko je slušao radio? Who was listening to the radio? Što ste čitali? What were you reading? Ko je čitao knjigu o Novom Zelandu? Who was reading a book about New Zealand? Što je Lisa tražila? What was Lisa looking for? Što su radili Jake and Julie? What were Jake and Julie doing? Ko je bio u posjeti dvorcu? Who was visiting a castle? Što je Anne pisala? What was Anne writing? Što je Rob kupovao? What was Rob buying? Gdje je Hazel plivala? Where was Hazel swimming? Što je radila Betty? What was Betty doing? Što je gledao Robert? What was Robert watching? Koga je čekala Ana? Who was Anna waiting for? Ko je čekao Saru? Who was waiting for Sarah? Ko je sjedio u kuhinji? Who was sitting in the kitchen? Gdje su Anne i Jane sjedile? Where were Anne and Jane sitting? Ko je radio prošle sedmice u restoranu? Who was working in the restaurant last week? Kada je Laura radila u restoranu? When was Laura working in a restaurant? Gdje je Laura radila prošle sedmice? Where was Laura working last week? Zašto je Bob išao kući pješice ili pješke? Why was Bob walking home? Ko je večerao u 6 sati? Who was having dinner at 6 o'clock? U koliko sati su Mia i njena porodica večerali? What time were Mia and her family having dinner? Odlično, svaka čast. U trećem dijelu lekcije i dalje imate priliku da vježbate svoje mišiće za engleski, da vježbate svoju fluentnost, dakle da lomite taj svoj jezik tako što ćete davati odgovore na pitanja. Dakle, ja sada pitanja čitam na engleskom, a vi dajete odgovore isto tako na engleskom. What was I doing? You were playing cards. Who was playing cards? Where was Alice walking? Around the lake. Who was walking around the lake? Alice was. What was Carol doing? She was listening to the radio. Who was listening to the radio? Carol was. What were you reading? A book about New Zealand. Who was reading a book about New Zealand? We were. What was Lisa looking for? She was looking for her ring. What were Jake and Julie doing? They were visiting a castle. Who was visiting a castle? Jake and Julie were. What was Anne writing? An email. What was Rob buying? Flowers. Where was Hazel swimming? In the pool. What was Betty doing? Her homework. What was Robert watching? Star Trek. Who was Anna waiting for? Sarah. She was waiting for Sarah. Who was waiting for Sarah? Anna was. Who was sitting in the kitchen? Anne and Jane. Where were Anne and Jane sitting? Do you remember? In the kitchen. Who was working in a restaurant last week? Laura or Laura was. Dakle, sasvim je svejedno kada dajete ove odgovore za subjekat, da li ćete još dodati i taj pomoćni glagol. Dakle, možete reći Laura ili Laura was. When was Laura working in a restaurant? Last week. Where was Laura working last week? In a restaurant. Why was Bob walking home? Because his car had a flat tire. Who was having dinner at 6 o'clock? Mia and her family. What time were Mia and her family having dinner? At 6 o'clock. Evo, dođu smo mi do kraja još jedne follow-up lekcije na ovom kanalu. Nadam se da osjećate napredak, a trebali biste ukoliko radite po uputstvima koje sam vam dala. Do naredne lekcije sve vas lijepo pozdravljam i vidimo se uskoro.